But anyway, welcome back to this third episode of Krisullis for the Creative. Today I have the pleasure of being joined by Randy. So Randy, why don't you just tell us a bit about yourself? Like, what do you do? Who are you?
Sure. The way I like to talk a little bit about where I've been in my life is to say that for the first 20 years of my career, I was a banker. So I worked in all areas of banking, personal banking, commercial banking, in the back office, doing credit risk management and marketing, and all of that was really my goal with a lot of that was that I wanted to be able to someday go overseas and work with microfinance. That was sort of my goal out of all of that. And I was lucky enough after about 20 years in the banking world to make the switch over to the not-for-profit world and start spending some time there. So I did some work in social community investment consulting. And then I actually had a chance to go work overseas for a microfinance company for 2 years. That was my big, that was the big life goal, and really loved it. My wife was able to retire from her job and come spend those couple of years with me in East Africa. And we worked for a company over there called 1 Acre Fund that helped small farmers build their farming skills, and by provision of credit to actually help them build their profitability of their business as well. So it was really an amazing time in my life for sure. I got to work. There was about 8 different countries that I had under my belt. I was in a finance function, so I helped move money around. That was my big role with the company, and so I got to travel a lot between these different countries and experience different cultures and everything like that. We ended up having to come back to Canada because I had some family members that had some health issues. So that was the reason to sort of end that time of my life. And so we've been back here in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, for about 6 or 7 years now. And I worked for a number of different not-for-profits over that time. And I'm just embarking on a new phase of my career, and I'm actually going to go back to banking. During this time in COVID, I think a lot of people have been rethinking what they want to do with their lives. And one thing that kept popping up for me was that I really missed working with entrepreneurs. That was one of the funnest times in my careers in banking. And so on February 1st, I'll actually be going back to work for a local credit union and working with a group of entrepreneurs to help them build their businesses. So that's pretty exciting piece.
No, it sounds exciting as well. Although I love to hear about other places, especially nowadays that I can't travel. The audience is probably tired of me saying this all the time. So could you take me back to that time in East Africa? I would love to hear a bit more about that. Maybe a good story or like a valuable lesson you got from down there.
Yeah, I think I think it was just leaning in was, the most important part of it all. I took the job not knowing a lot about East Africa. And I remember when I first got there, I don't even know if I could have told you where Kenya was on a map. And here I was jumping on an airplane to fly there. I landed in Nairobi at about midnight. And I didn't actually even know how to dial internationally on my cell phone. So I arrived there, and my ride wasn't there to pick me up. And spent the next half hour sitting with my luggage, my two bags. My whole life now is basically in 2 bags. And I arrived there and was sitting outside and trying to figure out I had a phone number, but I had to figure out how to make my phone actually dial internationally. And eventually we got that all figured out, and drove to the apartment that I was supposed to be staying at. And it was just an incredible experience. One of the things that was happening at the time was there was some immigration issues with the company that I was working for. And so I ended up having to stay in Nairobi for quite a bit longer than expected, because the place that I was supposed to go work at was another 2-hour flight and then another 3-hour car ride from there. It was quite far into the back country of Kenya. And so I remember really distinctly one day was just sitting in Nairobi and hearing some chanting outside. There was a political protest going on, and I'm sitting there doing my finance work, and yet I'm surrounded by all this different noise and sounds and all those things. And I thought, boy, I'm a small town Canadian boy, and I'm a world away for sure.
It must have felt a bit like, like that expression of you being like you're out in deep water, just surrounded by water, you can't see land. It's like, I got myself into some shit.
Yeah, and it was back and forth because I was doing finance work during the day. It was very familiar. I knew what I was talking about. I would be jumping on phone calls with people in different parts of the world. My boss worked in New York. My banker was in Britain, so I would be talking to him. I had other contacts, in Canada and across Europe. And the day was very familiar. And then I would shut off for the day and I would walk out the door. And here I had been talking about, currency hedging strategies and major financing and all of these things. And then I'd walk out the door and there would be a donkey standing there in front of me, blocking my way to walk down the dirt pathway to walk back to my house. So it was just such a change from, from a comfort level to a different world, as you said. And I really liked that because it was almost like I was on vacation every day. As soon as 5 o'clock came around or 7 o'clock or whenever I was done work, I would walk out into this new culture and just be surrounded by it. And I found it really different to live in a place in a different culture than to just visit it. When you go and you visit and you're in a resort, you don't get surrounded by the reality of that community. And it was just an amazing experience to be really surrounded by a community and really live within it and talk with people that that live there all the time rather than being in a resort setting.
Yeah, I totally understand that, because one of my dreams is actually going to Australia for working, because I want to, as you mentioned, really experience being a part of a different culture, not just being there, like being as a guest, but actually really learning what it's about and just experience something completely different. Also, just to have nice winters, I think is a part of it. That's something you can probably relate to as a Canadian. I think it's even
I did love that
here in this year. You mentioned on your LinkedIn profile, did a little bit of research, had to, that you're on a deer sky. Could you explain to me what you mean by that?
I think what I've always done throughout my career, whether it's been, in banking or in the not-for-profit world, is I've been able to take ideas from one industry and apply them to a different situation. So when I was in banking, I did a lot of community work and was able to bring those ideas around social justice and social impact and social entrepreneurship to the table in a banking world. And then when I was in the not-for-profit world, I was able to bring business ideas that were really different and foreign to them, to the organizations that I worked with, to expose them to those type of different business ideas, And I think that's what I mean when I talk about an ideas guy, is not so much that I come up with the brand new ideas, but I love to connect different ideas from different industries and places with new industries and help people see that if we carve it all together, we can make a bigger difference than if we just stay the way we were. So one of my, I think the best example of that is social enterprise. The idea that you can have a social goal and that you can still run your business as a business and still have, strong business ideals behind it, but to also have a strong social mission at the heart of it is, I just think, the best blend of both worlds.
So from what you explained, it's similar to the thing I'm normally saying is, I don't see problems, I see solutions. It's like, it's that different way of looking at an opportunity.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's, again, I feel a little bit blessed with the career that I've had because I've had my foot in so many different industries. I think over my career in banking, I've probably reviewed about 4,000 different financial statements and looked at, that many businesses. And some of them have been successful and some of them have been not as successful. And so immediately when I come up with a challenge for whatever organization I'm working for or whatever client I'm working with, I'm thinking back sort of into that idea of, okay, where have I seen something like this before? It doesn't have to be the exact same industry, but where have I seen this issue before? And what have people done with it? And it's surprising when you can come up with what you can come up with if you have an open mind and can think across different industries to how you can bring new ideas to solve different problems, for sure.
Yeah, completely. And that's actually one thing I like about how Caroline is doing things, because me and her was supposed to have our meeting, this like whole podcast recording first. But instead we decided to reschedule it to last. So people have that open mind. We are not influenced by what she said. We influence her instead on the
Great
direction.
idea. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of that whole concept, I think, also works really well with everything else we're doing. You said you worked in a lot of industries. I'm curious to know, like, what are some of your favorites?
That's a great question. I do like the finance world. I'll just start out by saying that the fact that I'm going back to it obviously shows that I really enjoy that world, and I do think that that credit is a tool that can be used for good. It can get people in trouble, and I certainly hear and read lots of articles around how people should be afraid of credit and don't get in too deep and things like that. But I see credit as a tool that can really help move people forward. For example, in the 1 acre fund that I worked for, we would lend money to people and we would charge them interest. So these were poor farmers and we would still charge them interest. And a lot of people, thought that was, not fair, or why would you charge poor people money? And we would charge them quite a bit of interest. It was actually 40% interest. So people just say, that's crazy. How does that make sense? But the thing that they didn't realize, or that, we would go forward with the story, was that by using that credit, people were able to get a 300% return on their money and move that their farms that much further by so much more. So they were definitely moving forward, even though they were paying a higher interest rate. And that higher interest rate allowed us to pay our local staff, a living wage, and make sure that they were also looked after from an organizational perspective. So it was applying business principles to a charitable situation. And so again, that area makes a lot of sense for me, and I really enjoy it. What are some of the other industries that I might have enjoyed? I think an interesting one is when people would come into me and say they're consultants. And that was always interesting. I say, what do you do? I'm a consultant. And I thought, okay, well, we got to dig a little bit deeper, because there's so many different types of consultants in the world. And so I always enjoyed learning how people would bring their different spins to that world of consulting. Some did it, again, well, and some did it not so well. But I think the ones that really succeeded were ones that pulled on a deep experience from something that they had in their career. So, my brother is that an example of that. So he was a fire chief for 20 years of his life, and really learned from the ground up how to build his own good fire department. And now he's a consultant that actually helps other fire departments understand how to build their fire departments better. And so I find that, the really successful consultants were ones that came from a deep understanding and a deep experience that they brought forward to other people. I love truckers. Truckers, that sounds like a funny one to like, but
yeah,
I love
I love their humor. I love their humor.
Yeah, absolutely. It was funny, this successful trucker was a trucker that, understood the business part of trucking and could make sure that he was going to make $1 on a load and then expand from there. Unfortunately, an unsuccessful trucker was a trucker who was losing money on loads and thought that getting more truck, he was losing $100 let's say on a load, and he thought if he got another truck, he would do better. But my point to him was always that if you're losing money on a load, expanding just means you're going to lose more money. So anyway, I always enjoyed dealing with the truckers. That was one industry that stuck out for me, and it's a story that I tell often. So it was
there's so many different people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the key. I don't necessarily know that I have a lot of favorites. My favorite is that I love entrepreneurs, and I love the things they come up with, and the strange ideas that they think they can make money on. One of my favorite stories that highlights that I should never try to make a decision on like an entrepreneur is that a guy came into my office once, and he said he wanted to open up a pizza shop, and his pizza shop was going to be a store that you could pay one price for your pizza and you could have unlimited toppings. He was going to call it Pizza Unlimited. And so for one price, you could have as many toppings as you wanted on your pizza. And I said, well, that's never going to work. You know, your costs aren't going to be under control. I don't know how that's ever going to work. So I think we gave him a small loan, but not everything he was looking for. And, you know, I was really proud over the years to see that he stuck to his dream. And Pizza Unlimited in Calgary is a franchise that's fairly well known and has lots of locations, and he somehow made that work. And so I just think it was a good example for me to understand and to say that sometimes as a banker, you're faced with things that seem like they don't make sense, but really looking at the operators and the owners and seeing their passion can make a real difference in how successful that business is going to be. So don't just dismiss ideas because they're new ideas, and you know, watch for what's behind the business. Don't necessarily just take everything at face value. So
yeah, for sure. I think that, like when we talk about before we had the recording on the whole thing of crypto, how new it is, but also then the comparison to being back to the 1700s and then having a person come up to say, you can pay with paper.
Yeah.
You wouldn't believe him. No way. Like the best ideas is the ideas that people know, that's never going to happen. Facebook, no. Netflix, nah, I want to go down and rent the movie. No, you don't.
Yeah.
People want what's new, what's easy. And one thing I want to comment on is when you talked about the whole like accumulating credit thing. Much like you, I don't see that as a bad thing. I just think when it comes to accumulating credit, you need to have a plan for it if you really want to be successful. And that's not going out and buying a nice thing and going on vacation. That's not a plan.
That's right.
That's
yeah,
just,
the best uses for credit are when that credit is going to provide a return to you, right? So if you get credit for a car and that car becomes an asset that allows you to travel to get a better job, you know, it allows you to get to work, eat more easily so that you can get a better job and earn more money. That's good credit. To your point about vacation, you know, if you get a line of credit and use it to go on vacation, then that vacation is gone and it hasn't really earned you anything, and you're stuck paying for it. So that's a sort of a bad kind of credit for sure.
well, I'm glad we agree on that. One thing I also want to know, since this podcast is the whole Krisullis is what brought it together, is what the inspiration for it is. I would love to hear what made you join Krisullis. What was your reasoning?
Yeah, I would say there's three things, and as I mentioned before, I'm fairly new to Krisullis, so I'm still learning what drives this organization and where it's going to move forward. But I think the three things that really brought me forward was, number one, I was introduced to it by a contact here in Calgary, Al Noor, who I believe you're going to talk to later in the week, and he had such a passion for the organization. So that's one of the first things that I look for, is if the idea or the organization is something that really drives passion from somebody that I know and respect, that's going to draw me in, even if I don't know anything more than that. So he was so excited about the idea that it sort of got me interested. The second part was what the idea actually was. I'm a personality type that they call a blue personality type, and that means that I'm often driven by process and how things work. And so when I learned that Krisullis was largely, or one of its main missions was going to be to drive people to better employment opportunities. I was super excited. That's something that I've done on just as a personal interest over my career. Is I've connected a lot of people with good jobs and helped them to find out what they're good at in life, and done a lot of coaching around how to find your best your best employment opportunity that fits you the best in the world. And so when I saw that we were talking about an organization that was going to help people that were either new to the work world or that were mid-career and looking to make a change, that's something that I felt like I could add some value to, because it's something that's been a passionate part of my life. And then the third thing I think was Carolyn and what she's done with the organization to date. So again, something that I learned from my banking days is you always bank on management. And she's been able to build a really solid base of interaction and community already in what she's done. And so I think you had mentioned earlier that, when is the right time to bring an organization forward? And I think this is the right time and and Caroline's the right person to move it forward. She doesn't know all of the next steps, but she doesn't pretend to want to know all of the next steps. She's a community builder, and at the heart of what I think, one of the pieces that she wants Krisullis to be is a community-driven organization, and she's got the skill set to attract those kind of people to do that. So, so I would say Alnur, the fact that it was employment related, and Caroline were really the three things that drew me to Krisullis and made me want to put some time up against it.
It's actually, a lot of it's very similar to my story. I had the same thing with Linda. She was very excited about this project. So when she said something, I was like, all right, if you're willing to spend your time on it, I'm willing to hear her out. And when I heard about it, I fell in love with it. And well, as you mentioned, like, that's the good thing about Caroline is she doesn't expect to know it all. She knows she doesn't know it all, but she's very good at putting the right people in the right places. Like you hear a lot of other great entrepreneurs do. It's all about putting the right people in the right places. Because even if you were an expert in everything, you couldn't do it all. I've tried that, doesn't work. You get stressed and you get tired. That's the only two things you get from that. It's not fun in any way. One thing I'm actually very curious about. You mentioned a lot about finance, and to me, when I hear finance, that's numbers. And and so I'm actually really curious. Like numbers people like yourself, I'm also very curious, like, what kind of hobbies, like what else do you like to do? Because to me, like, numbers is like, I'm thinking about school and I'm like,
Absolutely. It's interesting that you bring that up, because people always assume that about me, that I'm a numbers person. And I will often share with people, I actually failed accounting 3 times before I passed my first accounting course.
Surprise. That's a big surprise.
So I like the story that numbers tell. So I would say I enjoy the story that you can learn to read from interpreting financial statements of companies. So I'm not much of an accountant, and I'm not heavy into mathematics, but I am into stories, and I've learned to interpret the stories from financial statements. The other piece about banking that has always been interesting to me is the people part of it, though. So I just love hearing the stories. I love asking the questions. I love understanding more about what drives people, and stitching together those stories. So it's the stories for me that are interesting more so. The numbers are the code that you have to interpret to be able to get to the story, but they're not the deal by themselves. So what else do I do? I love to camp. I'm definitely an outdoors person and love to get out and do backcountry camping and hiking and all of the things that go along with that. As a Canadian, I do a little bit of skiing and snowboarding for sure. There's where we live about an hour and a half away from some of the best mountains in the world. So I'd be foolish not to take that up as a part-time hobby. I do a little bit of golfing. I would always tell people I'm not very good at it, but I love the being outside and the act of it. My wife and I both golf together, so that's another thing that we can sort of do together. Yeah, and then just reading. I read a lot of fiction, so nothing too heavy, but I love spy novels and doomsday prepper novels and things like that. I don't know. It's a bit of an odd type of thing to read, but I always enjoy learning about, what would happen if the end of the world came about, and make sure that I'm ready for it. That type of thing. I think it ties into the camping that I enjoy doing. So yeah, so I would say
how large those
yeah.
things. Well, actually, I think a lot of people, especially some like spy novels and that whole when it's like stories about crime, if it's TV shows, movies, or books, like everybody kind of loves them.
Sure.
I don't know why, but everybody do. It seems like it, at least.
It's the life we all want to live, the excitement.
And yeah, exactly. And also what you mentioned about numbers telling a story. I really like that. That resonates with me deeply, because numbers always tell you the truth. That's the nice thing about numbers. They're very easy to relate to. Not like a whole complex thing that we have in our head. Sometimes understanding that is standing and looking confused. But it's a nice thing, especially also something I use in management. Like everything at our place is measured for good or for worse. But actually, I think it's a good thing, because it really allows me to go in and look at the places where I can best spend my time with an individual. Where do I need to help them grow?
Sure.
It's not about like spying on people. It's about getting more insight into it.
Absolutely. That's how I often start out with a new entrepreneur. Is I'll look at their financial statements first, and I'll get an impression of how their company is running. I'll get an idea of what the story is, or at least have questions about what I might ask. And then I'll talk to the entrepreneur and I'll say, how's your business going? How are things going? And I get a little bit deeper into different parts of it. But at the end of the day, I'm looking to see if the two stories match, and how they work with each other to help me to better understand how that business is running. And so, sometimes they don't match, and that's always a red flag that an entrepreneur might not know exactly what is happening in their business. But oftentimes they do match, or the story that the entrepreneur is able to give me can help explain better why the numbers are trending a different way. So, but it's really interesting to learn to take those two stories and mesh them together to come up with one overall story, for sure.
Now, I've like seeing the dragons, then seeing people fucking up their numbers. I'm sitting here crying, because like, you did so well. You need to remember those numbers. They're so crucial.
Yeah. Somebody once told me that to start a successful business, or run a successful business, you need to have three people. You need to have the person that knows how to do whatever it is you're doing. So if you're in a baking company, you need to have somebody who's the chef who knows how to bake. You need to have a person who knows how to sell, because every company has to be able to sell themselves. And then you need a sort of operations/finance person, somebody who knows how to make things run smoothly and knows how to interpret the numbers. And most entrepreneurs can be one or two of those things, but it's only the rare person that can actually be all three of them. And that's why I'm sort of a big believer that more successful companies are run by partnerships, where you have multiple people involved, than companies that are run by one single person themselves, because it's just so rare to find somebody who's all three of those things in one bucket.
Yeah, and also it's just important to get another perspective, another person's insight, because when you've done something for so long, you kind of get blind. That's what something like you did yourself is, like going out in finance and then re-entering it. You're entering with a whole new perspective, a whole different look at things. Everything is different. And you have all those new ideas. One thing before we finish off here, I want everybody to kind of answer this question. Where do you see Krisullis in 3 years?
That's a great question. I think what Krisullis is going to grow into is an organization that's going to be, I think, what I would call fairly unique, in that it's going to combine and bring together people that are looking for jobs, but almost as importantly, people that are looking for people to fill the jobs. And I don't see the current models that are out there in recruiting companies working as well as they could right now. I think that it's an expensive, hiring new people is fairly expensive. It doesn't always work out. People don't spend the time to get the right person in place. The current way that we do interviews is not wonderful. And it's resulting in this huge churn for companies and costing them a lot of money. And I really see the opportunity for Krisullis to flip that on its head and involve job seekers and hiring managers in a completely different way, where they really build relationships, and where as an organization we're able to profile people who really are the best people for the jobs that they're going to move forward to. I think we're going to start doing that, in Africa, maybe do some work in India, but I can really see how this idea is something that is a global need. And so in 3 years, we probably won't be completely global in 3 years, but I think we'll have a great base of people in Africa and possibly India that are truly connected for the first time in their job search opportunities. Yeah, it's almost like, LinkedIn is good. LinkedIn has been good for the job market, and it's connected a lot of people. But I think Krisullis has the opportunity to connect people in a more genuine way, and especially for folks that maybe haven't had that opportunity to interact with different mentors before. So, yeah, I think there's a good base started already. 3 years is a really short time. It's going to go by in the blink of an eye. But I think that we'll have built some really good relationships, and we'll have gotten many people into the right roles, and many companies will be really happy with the people that they've received. So I think it's going to be a win-win for both sides for sure.
It sounds like it. And as you mentioned about like the whole connection and getting into those networks, having those mentors. For me, I think what has allowed me to grow a lot in my early years is that, and like having that connection and being able to build those connections and meeting people all around the world, which is really what Krisullis at the ground level is about. We're all about building those connections. So thank you very much for your time, Randy. If people want to connect with you, talk about finance, maybe some camping or whatever else we talked about today, where can they find you?
Find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the outfit that I use the most. So I would say I'm very open to connections on LinkedIn. Look me up, Randy Coutts, Coutts. I'm here in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and I would love to connect with you and start a conversation there.
For sure. I will make sure wherever the link is going to be above, below. So many different places nowadays. There's going to be a link so it's easy to find, so people can just click that. Well, thank you very much for taking the time featuring on today's episode. It was a real pleasure having you on. I hope the audience enjoyed this as much as me. And yeah, make sure to follow up, subscribe.